Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. White light bled through every seam of the chamber. Not sunlight, too clean for that. No shadows, no temperature variation, just an endless, perfect sterility humming behind the panels. Somewhere overhead, filters hissed with the rhythm of breath not her own. Pale blue interface windows floated midair, 3 across, 7 deep, each layered with entries tagged cross-species behavioral variants, Terra. Some pulsed amber with conflicting citations. One entry looped a dissection feed, a human male chest cavity expanding and collapsing in exaggerated scale. Another fed through a semantic transcript from interrogation logs, every 7th word mistranslated. Velshera didn't blink. A flex of her lower right digit toggled the glossary node. Orgasm. Classification. Undefined. Priority. Cultural high-frequency idiom. Interpretive flag. Morale euphemism. Possible excretory analog. Usage instances. 14,827. All informal. Recommendation. Dismiss for redundancy. Reassign under primitive humor. A slow exhale barely moved her lungs. Not disgust. Not quite boredom. Just fatigue at yet another Terran term bloated with unnecessary layers. They used 6 linguistic variants for pleasure. 4 for want. Dozens for the gradation between. Her notes scrolled automatically as she skimmed. It felt like the universe was collapsing through me. I forgot where my bones were. I saw stars, man. Actual stars. Smeared metaphors. No observable data. No physiological specificity. No control samples. Nothing usable. Another flex closed the glossary and triggered her recorder. Neurochemical output from specimen interaction logs continues to lack taxonomic discipline. Cross-referencing failed to yield neural stability markers. Recommending term orgasm be classified under cultural abstraction, pending reassignment to jest category. The report posted. Her overlay dimmed. Silence pressed harder in its place. A faint scent of oversanitized polymer drifted from the filing mesh embedded in the walls. Cold metal seams pulsed faintly with temperature regulation. No heartbeat. No ambient sound. No environmental pressure to distract the mind from its own drift. Yet drift it did. Across the screen, one name hadn't cleared queue protocols. Specimen #442T. Origin. Terra, Sector Ophiuchus Delta. Status, contained. Previous classification. Hazardous due to communicative subversion. Updated designation. Subject of xenobiological integration trial. A face flickered briefly across the interface. Brown skin weathered with exposure, hair clipped short, eyes fixed somewhere off-camera with untranslatable intent. No fear, no surrender posture. The note beside it read. Subject maintains anomalous emotional projection despite confinement. No mention of compliance. No mention of adaptation to containment. Just projection. Curious. Protocol required observation only. No verbal exchange unless permitted by senior directive. Yet his file had been rerouted, cleared for first-tier access. Reaching toward the control queue, her primary finger paused mid-air. Something lingered at the edge of the footage, a stillness behind his expression, not defensive, not hostile. Closer to anticipation. He'd known someone would study him. Perhaps welcomed it. Velshera leaned in slightly. Humans catalogued their body reactions as if tracking divine event. Their behavior around the term orgasm bordered on reverence. Every descriptor implied mystery, impact, transformation. As if biology alone didn't account for the process. They didn't treat it like function. They treated it like revelation. Another entry cross-flashed. She cried. Said she didn't know it could be like that. Neither did I. Velshera muted the log before the tone modulation could finish. No empirical basis. Just repeated dramatics, delivered in oddly symmetrical emotional forms. Were they trained to respond this way? Did they mimic each other to maintain bonding hierarchies? Fascinating. Irritating. Her secondary console blinked once. New assignment delivered. Subject assignment confirmed. Dr. VL Shara. Contact window. 6th-hour cycle observational clearance granted. Specimen. #442T. Purpose. Behavioral verification, neurochemical clarification. Assignment locked. Redundant cancellation protocols remove. It would not be optional. Another window unfolded beside her. Input queue scrolling with soft amber text. Please refrain from empathetic extrapolation. Maintain all interactions within intellectual objectivity. Do not anthropomorphize anomalous reaction profiles. The advisory ran 3 times before fading. Velshera's hands folded into one another slowly. Cool skin on cool skin. 6 digits threading together without tension. No sign of anticipation. Only repetition. The moment passed without a single breath to mark it. But deep in the chamber where recycled air never aged and silence held absolute command, a single line from the human transcript continued looping behind her leftmost console. They catalog it like it's sacred. No physiological justification existed for that claim. No procedural explanation could make it coherent. No precedent among over 200 mapped species validated such romanticization of a bodily event. And yet, that line remained untouched, unflagged, unedited, still sitting there, waiting. Glass hissed as it sealed behind her. No scent followed. No greeting protocol initiated. Just pressure equalization and silence. Lights adjusted themselves without transition, brushing cold light across titanium seating and a single water capsule sweating on the table. Opposite sat the human. Bare forearms, minor scarring, uniform stripped of rank but not posture. Shoulders squared, eyes relaxed but alert, something in his posture suggested he'd already assessed every exit, weapon potential, and blind angle. Not combative, just efficient. He lifted the capsule, turned it once between his fingers, sipped. No rush. No attempt to speak first. Just waiting. A kind of patience her species rarely encountered. Velshera didn't sit. The console between them lit softly, syncing translation matrix with his vocal profile. Tonal variations had already been catalogued. Sarcasm index unusually high, emotional inflection inconsistent with threat posture. Unreliable by Zaltari standards. Human by theirs. Her fingers twitched slightly before beginning. Is it true your species experiences a dopamine cascade in conjunction with reproductive spasms? Water caught halfway down his throat. He coughed. Hard. Twice. Wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, smearing a small drop across the scar at his jawline. Then leaned back slowly, brows lifted, watching her as if trying to decide whether she was serious or had just told the most deadpan joke he'd ever heard. Lady, he said, voice still catching faintly, are you asking me about orgasms like it's a lab result? No blink. No shift. No emotional register. We're verifying the functional accuracy of colloquial report. Dopamine anomalies persist across your species recordings. The phrasing remains biologically inconsistent. He laughed. Not a loud bark, just a short, fractured huff through his nose. You're serious. A small tilt of the head acknowledged the obvious. Her gaze never left the readings hovering behind his shoulder, vitals pulsing with organic irregularity. Elevated heart rate. Slight increase in surface temperature. Amusement. Y'all don't get off? Ever? He asked. The words passed through 2 filters before landing in her auditory lobe, none of them softening the crudeness. Still, she registered the shift in tone, half provocation, half genuine surprise. Her shoulders remained unmoved. We synthesize protein pairs. It suffices. His mouth opened a fraction, closed again. Silence lingered. One hand tapped a single finger against the table, once, twice, like checking for a pulse that wasn't there. That's the saddest sentence I've ever heard. The recording node blinked, registering the phrase. She ignored it. Sufficiency is optimal. Biological events should not require redundant emotional expenditure. That what your training tells you? It's the basis of reproductive efficiency. Emotional spikes compromise cellular replication stability. He stared at her for a long moment, eyes narrowed just enough to imply calculation but not disbelief. Okay, he said finally, leaning forward, arms folded on the table. So let me get this straight. Your entire species decided that sex is basically filing paperwork. No joy, no mess, no noise. Just, what? Press a button and get a fertilized egg. No buttons. Protein conversion through biochemical vapor chambers. Partner selection is rotational. Emotional interaction is restricted to ceremonial bondings, usually after offspring maturation. Standard protocol. Jesus Christ, he muttered, glancing up toward the ceiling as if it might have an opinion. Silence stretched again. Longer this time. She observed the way his expression shifted, not away from her, but deeper into himself. Not anger. Not judgment. Something else. A kind of mourning. You really don't get it, do you? He asked softly. No answer came. There wasn't one to give. He turned his head slightly, as if studying an animal behind glass. Orgasm's not just some spark in the brain. It's not an anomaly. It's proof that you're alive. That something reached inside you and moved something you didn't know could move. No data point matched that phrasing. No biological index in her archives categorized internal movement of emotion as a survival function. Still, the console did not flag it for deletion. What's the purpose of such an experience? She asked. He didn't laugh this time. You ever see somebody cry because something felt too good? Not pain. Not fear. Just too much. All at once. Their body couldn't hold it, so it spilled out. You think that's a joke? She didn't reply. Behind him, the walls hummed faintly. Temperature held constant. Lights kept their color. His vitals adjusted downward. Calm, not performance. Is this a mating behavior or a cultural dramatization? She asked finally. His eyes met hers directly for the first time. Might be both. Might be neither. But I'll tell you this. Ain't a single thing in our lives we call sacred that doesn't involve that feeling. Even if we're not talking about sex. She didn't blink. Across the room, her internal monitor recorded the spike in neural receptor activity. Hers, not his. No explanation offered itself. Just numbers. Untranslated. The request went through without resistance. Clearance stamped within seconds. No commentary. No supervisory delay. Perhaps no one had even read it. Just another behavioral query routed through xenobiological engagement protocol. Velshera didn't submit a rationale. Only the minimum. Follow-up observation, subject #442T, semantic anomaly under reassessment. When the entry panel slid open again 2 cycles later, the air in the chamber had shifted. Barely, but enough. Less metallic. Warmer by a degree not registered on external scans. Her steps landed softer this time. Not hesitant. Just more aware of surface texture beneath each foot. Jackson was already there, same posture, different energy. Shirt sleeves pushed higher. Elbows rested on the table, fingers loose, not folded. The water capsule remained unopened this time. No translation glass intervened between them now. Only open air and unspoken terms. He didn't speak first. No greeting passed between them. She accessed her terminal but didn't activate it. No sensors began scanning. No graphs flickered into view. Do you believe your species is chemically dependent on the event? She asked without ceremony. Jackson tilted his head, lips twitching just slightly. You still calling it the event? Damn. All right. Long pause. He leaned back, stretching once, vertebrae shifting beneath skin that had lost none of its tension. You ever seen a real one? His voice dropped a register, not flirtation, not condescension, something else. A tone she hadn't catalogued before. I mean the whole thing. The breath. The shiver. The look in the eyes when it hit. Not just the motion. The meaning. She blinked once. Only once. Across 3 training cycles and over 100 interspecies briefings, no one had ever phrased it like that. Not even her own superiors, who dissected mating protocols with sterile obsession. No, she replied. Didn't think so. He didn't smile this time. Just let the words hang between them, like smoke that wouldn't rise. What you saw in those pods, he said, slower now, that's just mechanics. Input-output. Pressure, friction, fluid exchange. You could teach a vending machine to do that. The room held still. Even the low ventilation hum seemed to fade under his voice. But a real one? Jackson tapped his chest. Starts here. Not there. He nodded toward her display case. You need connection. Timing. A kind of surrender, but without giving anything up. It's not just about the body, it's what happens inside it, when everything forgets how to lie for a second. His hand flattened against the table. Not a gesture. A placement. No defense systems. No exit plans. Just raw input that changes something. She didn't record. The terminal remained dark. Do you volunteer to demonstrate? She asked. He looked up. No surprise in his expression. No raised brow. Only the subtle shift in how he exhaled. Less controlled. Less armored. I don't do demonstrations, he said carefully. Then what would you call it? I'd call it sharing. If we're doing this, it's not gonna be me in a glass tube, and you ticking boxes on a clipboard. Her gaze didn't waver. I don't seek pleasure, she said plainly. Didn't say you did, he replied. But maybe it's not about seeking it. Maybe it's about finally letting something in. No scientific protocol accounted for that phrasing. She studied his mouth as he said it, the shape of each word. Every phoneme fell with the same deliberate rhythm as data points, but not flat. His sentences landed like steps across thin ice, slow enough not to break, heavy enough to matter. What do you require? She asked. He tapped the capsule. Still sealed. His fingers drummed against it once. Privacy. No cameras. No supervisors pretending it's just data. You want real? Then treat me like something more than a subject. No expression registered across her face. Just thought. Not calculation. Not conclusion. A moment suspended without structure, where none of her training had an answer ready. The words didn't come easily. I've never shared anything, she said. Jackson leaned forward. Then maybe it's time. 2 hours after the interaction, the report drafted itself in her head long before her digits touched the console. Request type: Cross-species neurological alignment study. Subject ID: 442T. Procedure class: Tier 3 behavioral reproduction observation. Objective: verification of dopaminergic cascade via non-mechanical initiation. Language sanitization complete. Emotive risk flags none. Supervisory override required. Negative. Intimacy threshold disclosure redacted. She removed 2 lines before sending. One had described the interaction as inviting. The other contained a timestamp she'd stared at too long. Approval came back in under 4 minutes. No edits. Just a soft green pulse across her console and a location designation rerouted from containment deck to private chamber, research cohort 12B. The clearance tag didn't list human intimacy or demonstration. It filed under neurochemical event trial. In the notes, observed reactions to be compiled for integration into revised Terran behavioral map. No further input requested. No review committee assembled. No reflection from anyone above her station. She stared at the screen for a long time. Not reading, just watching the cursor blink between her name and his. Across the observation deck, artificial daylight pulsed faintly along the corridor seams, mimicking a sunrise designed to comfort species that required one. No one walked past her room. No footstep. No inquiries. Just silence, thick and clean. A faint hum from the wall spoke the truth better than the report. They didn't understand what they were approving. Or worse, they did, and it meant nothing to them. The room she entered that cycle had no windows, no observation lens, no recording suite blinking in a corner. The only light came from embedded panels near the ceiling, set low and neutral. A table. No restraints. 2 chairs, evenly spaced. He was already seated, posture loose, eyes steady. This time, she didn't speak first. Jackson watched her approach like someone watching an animal approach a trap it didn't understand. Not with cruelty. With caution. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice quieter than before. Her fingers slid across the embedded panel. The door sealed behind her. "No override registered. I've acquired clearance." "That's not what I asked." Silence filled the space between them. Longer than protocol usually allowed. Long enough for her to notice the way his knuckles flexed around nothing, the way his throat tightened before he swallowed. "I was assigned to study human physiological reactions to conceptual stress," she said, tone flat. Jackson didn't move. "But you weren't assigned to feel anything," he replied. One of his hands lifted from his lap, palm open. Not toward her, just upward, as if holding something invisible between them. "I don't do this for science, document. I do it for connection. I'm not a button to press. I'm not gonna perform for your thesis." Her breathing shifted slightly. "If we're doing this, I want you to feel it. Not as a chemical. Not as data. As a human." Every word landed like a marker dropped onto uncharted territory. No maps to reference. No codes to interpret tone through cultural dissonance. Her voice came slower now. Less certain. "I don't possess the framework for that." "Yeah," he said, "but maybe that's the point." The silence that followed didn't belong to the room anymore. It belonged to something else. Something neither of them had studied. Something that hovered just outside the perimeter of intention, waiting for one of them to reach for it first. She didn't retreat. Not in posture. Not in gaze. No protocols existed for what might come next. No authority had written a procedure for connection without structure. But inside her chest, something quiet shifted against her ribs. Not pain. Not fear. Just pressure. Internal. Uncharted. No guards escorted him this time. No sensor bands tracked the distance between his spine and the door. Just a soft pneumatic release as he stepped into the chamber, barefoot, carrying nothing, carrying himself. One pulse behind the door and it sealed in silence. Lights adjusted on their own, dimmer than before, less clinical. Still bright enough to read her hesitation from across the room. Velshera stood near the back wall, not braced, not frozen, just positioned with precision no longer governed by science. Hands clasped behind her, but not tightly. Shoulders not squared, but held. A stance built less from command, more from uncertainty wrapped in ritual. Jackson said nothing. One step. Then another. He didn't cross the full distance. Stopped with enough room for breath between them, his and hers. Held her gaze. Let her see that there was no hurry, no edge. Just presence. "You all right?" Voice even. Not soft. Not low. Just direct. She didn't nod. Didn't answer. Only her throat moved. A slow swallow that registered not as communication, but as recalibration. Her pupils shifted slightly, trying to measure something that wasn't measurable. Not in pressure. Not in light. "I'll guide you," he said. "But only if you let me." No visual reaction, yet the ambient temperature had changed. Her breathing, which began flat and steady, thinned. The shape of each inhale stretched longer than the last. Not labored. Just deeper. As if her body had begun measuring oxygen differently. Jackson raised one hand, not toward her, but to his own chest. Pressed flat, over the sternum. Then slowly, wordlessly, extended that hand halfway forward, palm facing her. No touch. Just an offer. Her gaze lingered on his fingers, the faint coarseness of his skin, small lines that marked heat, labor, something lived in. Her kind didn't form calluses. Their work required precision, not force. She reached forward, hesitant. Stopped short of his palm. Not fear, she said, tone barely audible. Just unknown. He let his hand drop slightly. Not withdrawn, just resting. Then let's make it known. Her fingers found his wrist first. The contact, neutral in every observable metric, sparked something unquantifiable. Not static. Not temperature flux. Something in her abdomen constricted. Not pain. Not digestion. Something else, compressing and releasing in rhythm she couldn't pace. Her other hand rose, not by intention. Across the back of his hand, her thumb traced the ridge of bone like identifying terrain. No instruction had told her to do that. The silence inside her head, normally layered with active logs, reflex pathways, anticipated response models, began thinning. Not shutting down. Not silenced. Just receding. Space opening where data usually resided. He watched her. No commentary. No lead. Only breath. The way his chest moved became a metronome her body began syncing with. Not by will. Not by mimicry. Her own lungs started adjusting their tempo, slow and deliberate. Her knees didn't give, but muscles deep along her inner thighs began tightening, trembling with micro-movements her species hadn't evolved to experience. No medical training accounted for this kind of sensory noise. No muscle group documented such low-frequency fatigue built from anticipation. Her pupils dilated further. Vision didn't blur, but depth changed. Jackson's face sharpened in the center of her focus, background fading, light shifting without movement. His skin reflected warmth her calibration nodes couldn't categorize. She let him close the distance. Only inches between them now. His hands never took. They waited. When one rose, it moved not toward vulnerability but toward anchor. Settled behind her ribs, not possessive, not instructional, just resting. Her spine stiffened, then bowed slightly. A breath caught in her throat, not blocked, just paused mid-transit. Muscles along her stomach tightened, then rippled upward. Not illness. Not resistance. Everything inside her had begun to wake. Skin flushed in irregular patches across her arms. Hands trembled. Not from cold. Not from fear. 1,000 microreceptors activated across dermal layers no Zaltari medical scan had ever recorded as responsive to touch. This wasn't pain. This wasn't malfunction. Her mind did not shut down. It opened. Wider than interface ports. Wider than language thresholds. Thoughts rushed through in colors, in pulses, in half-shapes she couldn't translate into her own dialect. Each sensation fractured into others. One contact became 5. 5 became breath. Breath became a field, expanding, contracting, filling in the contours of something she had never been inside before. Her legs buckled slightly. Not collapsed, just faltered. A tremor rooted in awe, not failure. Jackson's arm held her steady. No force applied. Just balance. She leaned forward without instruction. Forehead pressed gently against his collarbone. Not from protocol. From need. From something unstudied, unnamed, impossible to report. Silence didn't arrive. It settled. Layered itself over every surface like a second atmosphere. Not absence of sound, but the weight of what came before. Heavy. Unapologetic. Full. No movement. Just breath. His first, low and steady, pulled from deep within his chest, slow like something earned. Hers, still uneven. Inhalations broken in small jolts, as if her body hadn't yet agreed on how to process rhythm again. Air felt thicker in this space now. Not humid. Just changed. Altered at the cellular level, though no scan would show it. Velshera sat with both feet flat, knees slightly apart, back no longer upright. Shoulders lowered by a margin too small to be seen but too large to misread. Her fingers twitched once in her lap, 6 digits curling slightly, pausing mid-motion, then releasing without reason. She stared at them. watched how they flexed. The gesture was nothing new. She'd seen her own hands move for decades, under microscopes, while dissecting living tissue, while adjusting nanoprobes, while wiping away the sterilization serum that left no trace of scent behind. But here, in this chamber, no lens, no instruments, no observation, her hands did not feel like hers. Every nerve ending pulsed faintly beneath the surface. Not in pain, in presence. Each movement triggered a ripple that her nervous system couldn't predict. Muscles quivered where stability should have ruled. She turned her palms upward and stared again. They glowed faintly at the knuckles, blood vessels responding to internal chemistry her records hadn't mapped. Faint warmth traveled up each wrist. Still no words. Just breath again. A little steadier. A little closer to her own. Jackson hadn't spoken since. He remained close, but not touching. Not interfering. Posture unchanged. His presence didn't demand, didn't impose. It only existed. She felt it like she felt pulse against her inner thigh, quiet, constant, undeniable. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Closed it again. Looked down once more. A sudden urge moved through her, soft, almost imperceptible, the need to remember this shape of stillness. How her chest sat heavier yet more open. How her spine curved without bracing. How air didn't just enter her body, it stayed. Words formed again. Not composed. Not tested. Just aloud. We were wrong. Her voice broke on the second syllable. Not from emotion. Her kind didn't vocalize pain that way. The rupture came from truth too new for structure. A sound not built from confession, but from recognition. Jackson shifted slightly. No smile. No acknowledgement beyond a quiet narrowing of his eyes. As if he understood what she meant, even without the context she lacked. Not just wrong in classification. Not wrong in biology. Wrong in assumption. Wrong in dismissal. Wrong in believing that pleasure could be quantified without being felt. She looked up. He met her gaze. No one moved. No one needed to. The console lit before she touched it. Motion sensors keyed to breath had already begun parsing posture, estimating readiness to log official data. The interface knew when a report was due. It did not know when a report became irrelevant. Velshera stood a moment longer, unmoving, while the cursor blinked at the top of the blank input field. Her reflection hovered in the surface of the data glass, not her real face, just the filtered interpretation rendered by soft light. The eyes looked familiar. The space behind them did not. She sat. No diagnostic windows opened. No body scans initialized. Just text input waiting. Fingers hovered above the interface. 6 digits poised to categorize, to file, to convert experience into data. They didn't move. Not yet. The first word came without decision. Not chosen. Emerged. Observation. What occurred cannot be filed under reproduction. Second line slower, but uninterrupted. What I witnessed defies reproductive logic. No mechanical alignment. No hormonal burst. No predefined biological impulse. Humans do not copulate. They connect. The terminal made no objection. This connection is not mechanical, it is existential. Silence accompanied each keystroke, not the kind her chambers typically emitted, but something fuller. The kind of silence that formed after truth entered a space and refused to leave. Our classification models failed not due to poor translation, but due to absence of context. We mistook spiritual feedback for muscular noise. We mistook vulnerability for loss of control. We mistook what they value most as evolutionary waste. Cursor blinked again. Her breath paused. Just once. We assign them numbers, but they assign each other names. Pause. Names. Feelings. Meaning. There is no mating sequence. There is no completion marker. There is no trigger point. There is presence. There is surrender. There is recognition of self within another. That word, recognition, had no direct equivalent in the Bureau's classification schema. She typed it anyway. Let it stand unflagged. Her hands trembled once. A muscle in her shoulder tightened. She allowed it. The subject did not penetrate my understanding. He allowed me to see what we have never permitted ourselves to feel. I will submit a request for re-evaluation of our species' neurological architecture. Immediate reassessment of intimacy classification is mandatory. No blinking alerts. No priority flags. Just the next line waiting. We have treated sensation as a chemical echo. We were wrong. Sensation is memory, it is language, it is knowledge carried through skin rather than word. I no longer request permission to study this further. I request contact. The cursor froze. No system error. Just her hand holding steady above the final keystroke. Her pulse registered faintly in the console's edge sensors. No one read this report yet, but they would. Doors that normally hissed announced nothing. No escort codes. No wristband beacons. Just motion-triggered silence and an absence of surveillance. Velshera had overridden the protocols 2 hours earlier, citing internal recalibration testing. No one questioned her. No one monitored the excuse. She moved through the corridor with both hands occupied, each carrying one small, sealed vessel of Terran caffeine extract. Bitter, chemically unstable, and wildly inefficient by Zaltari metabolic standard. She hadn't acquired them for function. The chamber door read no clearance stamp. Still opened. Inside, Jackson sat cross-legged on the floor beside a low steel fixture, not quite a bench, not quite a bed. Back pressed against the wall, sleeves rolled halfway to the elbow, faint bruising along one forearm from earlier physical testing, though he hadn't mentioned it. Eyes lifted before his head did. No surprise. Just recognition. And a smirk, small but unmistakable. That same asymmetric rise of the lip she hadn't understood the first time. The expression that implied curiosity, not command. Invitation, not expectation. Didn't think you'd be back, he said. Her hands didn't shake, though the extract vessels were still warm from her palms. One extended outward, no ceremony. Just offering. He accepted it without looking down. The silence that followed wasn't avoidance. It was room-making. She sat beside him without asking. No need. No distance protocol. No inquiry about spatial boundaries. Just settled, spine aligned with his. Elbow not quite touching his. Breath sinking again, but this time not in imitation. In recognition. I believe, she said quietly, we have more research to conduct. His eyes didn't change shape, but something in his gaze did. Not brighter. Not softer. Open. He took a slow sip, grimaced faintly at the taste. You sure this isn't going to end in a follow-up report? Her fingers closed around her own vessel. Heat registered differently on skin that still hadn't returned to baseline sensitivity. There is no longer a report, she replied. Another pause. Jackson exhaled through his nose, quiet and deep. Good. No further words exchanged. None needed. Around them, the walls held their usual quiet, but this silence felt different. Less like absence, more like promise. Not empty. Waiting. Not for protocol. For presence.